Awesome. Awesome. I don't know, Leah, do you have anything, or do you want to answer questions?
Let's go to the questions.
Let's go to questions.
I think.
Let's go to the floor. All right, I'm going to start right here. If you want to say who you are and your question. Oh, I don't think we have you on the mic just yet in the room. Yeah, I think we can barely hear you. Go for it.
Debra, I have a question for you. In the last election, I did texting with an environmental organization to swing states. Most of the comments I got back were obscenities about how many times they had already been texted. Please leave them alone and get them off the list. Can you speak to that?
That never happens when you knock on a door either. Like, it's never happened to a field canvasser. Let's do two at a time if we want to do that. Want to come over here as well?
Hi, my name is Jess. I'm an AKS student, and I had a question for Amanda. You mentioned that local Democratic Party institutions are not very friendly to new people running. I'm a member of my local board committee and city committee in Somerville, Massachusetts, and I want to know what we can do better to be more welcoming and to work better with organizations like this.
Okay, two great questions to start. Let's start with obscenities. Debra?
You know what? I can take a pretty good guess which organization you were working with. So that is actually our fault because we started first and we ran a huge program. People told us to go like fuck ourselves all the time, and we were like, as long as you don't forget to vote, here's your polling place location. So I would, you know what? I guess steering your own ship in life is annoying for some people, and we literally were like, American flag, here's your polling location, and we would move on. By the midterm elections, like, this won't be happening. They won't be contacted so many times, but it really does take 5 contacts to get someone to do something. Mm-hmm. So if they tell you to go fuck yourself, but they vote.
Okay, are we the first panel that has to have a belief? Like, wait,
but by the way, that's not my fault. I mean, I'm literally quoting the voters. But yeah, I mean, it's just the hazard of community engagement. Good job.
All right. Thanks for all you do. All right, Amanda, what about a welcoming environment that actually is truly inclusive and helping people really be part of this process?
So I was able to go to the DNC meeting this past weekend in Atlanta, and it was an incredible experience to meet all these state party officials and DNC members who were so excited about what we were doing. So I do think that they're getting there. What I would say to a lot of these committees, and I said it to their face, is one, if you are not actively recruiting people other than rich old white male lawyers, you're doing the wrong thing, and we will call you out for it and hold you accountable and run people against you. The second thing I would say, and this is something to both people who are thinking about running and to the parties, is that I have come full circle on primaries. In 2015, my mantra was never primary, it feels bad. I've come full circle, we should primary everyone, both because I think it's important to hold elected officials accountable, and because if you think about where our Democratic leaders come from, they come from places that have really active Democratic parties and primaries. California, New York, Illinois, where the voters in the Democratic primaries get to decide who the best candidate is, not the institutions. So just because someone gets on the ballot first does not mean they're entitled to it. Just because they happen to have the most institutional support does not mean they're entitled to it. Mm-hmm. Let everyone get on the ballot and let them decide.
Yeah, that's so good. I think we're seeing this with the Perriello campaign for governor in Virginia, and that was supposed to be handed to the lieutenant governor, who's an incredible candidate, an incredible leader. However, the decision to have a real primary, and somebody's jumped into the race. Tom Perriello is running against Ralph Northam there, and already 6 weeks in has the same amount of name recognition and the same amount of support.
And when you have a primary, that means you have more campaigns, engaging more volunteers, talking to more voters. That's only a good thing.
Yeah, so
wasting money is a stupid premise. So,
all right, let's do another round of questions. I'm going to go up to the Loge. I've been told it is the Loge.
Hi, thank you. My name is George Simpson, and I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. My member of Congress is is being protested quite a bit, and he's one of the people who is saying they're from out of the district or paid, which is really funny to me and my friends at first, because it's like, us, like we know that's not true. But then when we talk to people, there's quite a few people who think that's very true. And I was wondering if you could comment on, is the work forward building those bridges with people who seem to have a completely different sense of reality from you, or is it working around them?
Good question. Good question. So we'll take a second one, then we'll go to the panel.
Hey, my name is Meredith Siegel, and I'm also a student here at the Kennedy School. I think just listening to the panel thus far has just been wonderful. We hear one of the dichotomies that's come up in organizing a lot of late. So we hear from Jess about the power of a movement that's truly grassroots and where there is no leader and everyone goes out and organizes with their friends and does their own thing and shows up. And then we also hear from Debra and from Leah how there are actually best practices and things that are efficient and effective, and we all know the power of speaking with a united voice and having one agenda. So I'm wondering, for any of you who would like to speak to how we balance those two so we create a movement that's sustainable and energizing and empowering and also highly effective.
That's so good. All right, so when we start with this crazy thing where people's actual constituents are coming to their town hall meetings, it couldn't be possible that their own voters could be showing up. So I know you've been doing some interesting things at Indivisible to respond to this.
Absolutely. I think that was one of the interesting things that we saw is we launched in December, and we sort of started to see this exponential growth over the next month and a half, and then by the time that a lot of the media had sort of realized that something was happening, there was actually a pretty sophisticated group of people who were organizing at a local level around the country. And we had also drafted like 100 volunteers who were sort of working on our own project and putting out all this content and everything. And so we had this sort of hilarious situation where we were trying to convince people that we weren't AstroTurf, and they were saying like, where's your funding coming from? And we were like, what funding? We paid for pizza for volunteers, right? Like, I mean, our major expenses in our first month were like pizza and t-shirts for everybody.
How much did you spend on your website?
I think it was like $176 for the year. And then we've like since obviously built out on various pieces of that, but like the initial upfront costs were just us putting it on.
How much was the run for something? Website to start?
Squarespace is $18 a month.
Yes, Squarespace, $18 a month.
And friends who are talented designers, but Squarespace is $18.
Nice. And then how about the second question? I don't know if you want to kick us off, Leah, about how to bring the two together. Oh, wait, you have an example.
I wanted to just quickly get to the question about sort of in your community, how you talk about this question. I think that there's a set of folks who are just going to believe what they're going to believe. There's a political narrative here that's operating that's useful to certain parts of the Republican Party to pretend that this is a paid protester phenomenon, and they're just going to keep up with that. What I think we did see over the last couple of weeks was that narrative, putting that narrative out there actually energizes people more. So it's just an enormously dispiriting and demoralizing thing to go to your town hall, talk to your member of Congress about the fact that you might lose your health care, and then check the news the next day and hear them calling you a paid protester. That actually gets people more upset. And we saw this with the Tea Party 8 years ago. Democrats dismissed them as AstroTurf. That just made them feel more like they were sort of not being listened to, and it got them more energized. I think that in general, there's a set of folks who really will buy into that narrative and go on with it, but a lot more people will sort of watch the reality as it shakes out over time and come to their own conclusions.
Yeah.
I want to add to that. I do think that the rhetoric, we have to, look at the rhetoric to see where they're going, though. And we saw the introduction of a lot of anti-protester bills, you know, all throughout the country and state legislatures. So I think it's, while it's invigorating, it's also really important to see what that kind of rhetoric is and try to anticipate what's coming with it.
Yeah. How about best practices, the second question, about how to bring those two together? I see Jess has an answer.
I just want to be like super tactical in answering your question really quickly though, which is don't repeat the paid protester thing. Like that's part of it. I think part of us saying like, I'm not a paid protester. Like why do we need to defend that? Instead, I'm a teacher, I'm a student, I'm a nurse, right? Another thing I love was people who were showing their IDs at town halls, like just in mass. It was just like a big ID show. I mean, that's kind of weird because, like, why do we have to show our papers to, like, be at a town hall? So, like, I don't know how I feel about that, but that's one. And to the question over here, I think, so this is, like, honestly, this is, like, my, Occupy Airports was, like, what I did on the weekend for fun, a little bit. Like, what I actually am is a professional organizer. And I would say the things that are always true, no matter what the issue, no matter what the location, is that you need someone to do it with you. You can't do it alone. You need to be able to have hope. And in this moment, I think that it is hard a little bit to like talk about hope. But part of what I loved about Occupy Airports, it was just people who wanted to do a thing and then did it. And then at the end of the day, like, people came through they were on one side of the door and then they came through the other side of the door. They were able to stop being detained at the airports. That's not going to be true in every fight. In fact, we're going to lose a lot, most of the time, over the next 4 years. So I think that more than anything, like, our best practice is like determination and an unwillingness to take no for an answer.
That's good. Let's do another round of questions. We'll start over here.
Thanks. My name is Bill. I'm here as an interested citizen. I do appreciate the presentations here tonight. To my ears, they strike me as 5 disparate presentations, not connected to each other. If we're talking about resistance, the resistance, would it not be more effective if the groups that you belong to and represent were connected with each other more fully so that you could collaborate with each other long term? If this is something you agree with, what mechanisms do you envision in that to make this happen?
That's good. I know they're going to have a lot of awesome responses to that question about how they're working together, but let's get a second question.
Ditto, but I'll just go a little further. So my name is Shonda Craven. I'm a healthcare marketer with Massachusetts General Hospital. Born and bred in Boston for 40 years, and I would say that that is also my concern with this particular movement. My concern is that there are so many disparate groups, so many single issue groups. I've had a couple of issues between people who are for Black Lives Matters, but they're anti-choice. I've had all these different groups that will refuse to come together and band as one for this one time. To get together and leave all of that stuff on the ground. And we're going to war, leave the battles. Let's just go to war. We got one enemy, we know what we need to do. Let's just do that.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if there's some big collective, if we're not gonna have a leader, are we gonna have some big collective where we just say, this is our war, we figured out who the enemy is, that's who we're doing today.
Yeah. These are such great questions. I love that somehow these two have been asked at the same time, and I know this panel's got some answers for you, so who wants to jump in first?
Can I take the first stab?
Yeah.
So when you run a nonprofit, and by the way, Vote.org is a 501c3 nonpartisan nonprofit. So what we are resisting is voter suppression, and maybe not the results of voter suppression. But when you run a nonprofit, everyone's like, why don't you work together on everything? And it's like, why don't all the voting groups join? And it's because we all have different areas of expertise. And in order for us to go far, we really need to drill into what we're good at. So Vote.org is really exceptional at using the internet to reach people, whereas Headcount is really great at fieldwork. And if we joined our groups, what we would have is a managerial nightmare instead of the ability to go really quickly and be really great at one thing. And in corporate America, no one's like, well, Nike and Adidas both make sneakers. Obviously, they should become one company. That just isn't how the world works when you're trying to maximize the ROI in terms of the effort that you put in. The other thing is a lot of our groups really do work together. I mean, Jess's group has existed for a few weeks. So I think that, we haven't had a lot of time to necessarily form.
Just to be clear, I don't have a group. Occupy Airports.
No,
isn't
fair.
a group.
I'm just literally the person I keep looking at.
Yeah.
So I would say that most of the people on this panel have probably worked together in at various organizations on various issues over the time. But if we try to get every person who's involved in resistance into onto one 17,000 person conference call and engage in consensus decision making, then we will literally just
That's how you get a broken Democratic Party.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
I'm actually referring to a call that happened a few weeks ago. But it's we need a little less milling about and a lot more forward momentum, and that happens if you can break into small groups that have expertise and allow them to move quickly.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on what you said, that resistance is a war. It's a war made up of lots of little battles. There is no one way to resist Trump. Take, for example, how do you stop him? Okay, you impeach him. House Republicans probably aren't going to do that, but Indivisible can put pressure on them. In the meantime, you look forward to 2018. That's what groups like Swing Left and Adopt a District and these organizations that are doing Knock Every Door are trying to prepare for. In the meantime, you also focus on city councils, where the leaders of the resistance really are, mayors who are creating sanctuary cities, school boards that are protecting trans kids in their communities, and make sure that the people who run for those offices are good and young and progressive and willing to fight. And you play the long game of winning back state legislatures so you can fix redistricting, so that in 2020 and 2022, we can put people in Congress who can stop them. It is not one war, it's many, many battles, and we have to be waging them on all fronts. And I'm in some of these Slack channels, especially with some of these newer resistance groups, and we're communicating, we're coordinating, but we're all doing a lot.
Yeah, Leah?
I'll add to that. I think just to pipe in on the army metaphor, I think that one way to think about this is an army, and the way that I'm fond of thinking about it is a symphony of activism. Sort of the idea that we are all contributing in different ways, and those interactions together are creating something really important and significant. And at the same time, like if I tried to play the flute, I would be really bad at it. So like trying to figure out, how do you sort of understand and coordinate with each other so that like the people who are really in the lead, who understand any given issue the best, who've been doing the organizing for a long time, are taking the lead on that. And still adding up to something greater than the sum of its parts.
I think you had an example you were sharing with someone else. I was sitting in on a conversation today about there was an issue. You had a conference call with like quite a number of people on it, and you had other speakers from other organizations come on very deliberately. And I think this is like old school organizing versus new school, which is like it's an open source, rising tide lifts all boats. Instead of fighting over the same pie, we're going to make a bigger pie. Instead of thinking my piece means I have to take supporters, donors, people, emails from other folks. Like, how have you been doing that in Indivisible?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what we see as our advantage is being able to give a platform to people who are experts on given issues. So, for example, when the Muslim ban the refugee and Muslim ban first came out, we pulled together our list for a call with the ACLU, the National Immigration Law Center, International Refugee Assistance Project, and Asian Americans Advancing Justice, the groups that were taking the lead on challenging it in court and across the country, and gave the 35,000 people who joined the call the chance to hear from the people who really were the experts. And then we sort of talked with them beforehand about like, oh, this is the congressional element of the strategy, even though that's not necessarily where the real energy is. The focus is on the courts, but we can sort of give you a platform to talk about that battle, and then we can amplify the congressional side. So I think finding those kinds of overlaps and places where we all add value to each other's efforts is really powerful.
Yeah, it's really a yes and. I think everyone needs to do what they're great at and work together better, right? So both are true. I would say questions right, the answers are right. It's all got to come up.
So I think in this new age, what we're really seeing is that you have to stay nimble, and all of these organizations have to stay nimble. And I think that that's really the big change, is there's no set way to do anything anymore. So as we move forward, how do we find the best times to coordinate versus the best times to stay focused on our own things? And then how do you saw the success of the Women's March being in part because they had a very inclusive platform that that was, I think, unprecedented in a lot of ways. And then you had a lot of different organizations pulling resources and coming together, and a lot of different individuals coming together. So when are those moments that you need that to happen? I think that's a good question.
Offer, I just don't agree. I'll offer like a counterpoint. I think to me, like, not all the organizations that exist will last. Not all of the people who are being engaged will stay engaged in this moment. Part of what people are responding to right now is a reaction. I think it's on all of us as the resistance to articulate the values that we're fighting for instead of who we're fighting against. And this is what I mean about the next 4 years and losing. I believe strongly in the power of people. That's what Occupy Airports taught me. We're not going to have an email list. We don't, like the website, you'll see it's not being updated right now. We don't have an organization. I'm not filing for 501c3 funding. And that's because that's not what it's for. It was to organize the people. So to me, I think if the people want there to be a big coordination of organizations or groups or leaders, there will be. Otherwise, I think that they'll continue to organize in their communities about the things they care about the way that they want to. I hope that we won't see ourselves in tactics, i.e. we're the former congressional staffers who started the Google Doc. We're the people who run for office. We're the people who organize the protests. I hope that's not what happens, and I hope instead what we start to coalesce around is an articulation of the America that we're fighting for. And I don't think that that takes funding or status. I think it takes feelings and articulation of who you are and what you believe in. That's pretty hard. It's not easy. I'm not sure how we do that, but I want us to figure that out.
You were a born organizer. That was right there. That was okay. Let's go back out to the floor. So I'm going to go up here and then to this mic to keep the order.
Hi, my name is Sri, and I go to school here. I'm originally from Houston, Texas, though, and I'm sure, like a lot of people here, me and my brothers and sisters, we've all moved out of Texas. We're in D.C. and New York and Boston, but we come from really blood red states, or some of us from blood red counties, and I am interested in going back at this point and either running or helping to win specifically state legislatures, right? But I have a question for you. On the one hand, we could all move back to the red places where we came from, like Texas, or there could be a national strategy, like maybe it's Colorado, maybe it's Delaware, maybe it's North Carolina, Michigan. I don't know where the best place in the country right now for me to apply my efforts are. And for those of you that think that the Democratic National Committee is not doing that, what can we be doing right now to take all the energy at Harvard and all the universities around the country, all this progressive energy, and direct it into the right places around the country so that we don't have a catastrophe in 2018?
Good, let's go to the second. There's some support for that question. Let's go over here.
My name is Cornelia, and I'm also an HKS student. Actually, my question is related to that. You're all doing really impressive things with mobilization and activism, and I feel like that is a really big part of the story that came out of this election. And to me, another big part of the story, and something we talk about here, is engaging with the other side, people who didn't agree. We don't agree with people who didn't vote for the same candidate we did. And I'm wondering what you all are doing to not only mobilize people who might already agree with you, but also like how to understand the other side's point of view as well.
That's a good question. So just a time check. We got 10 magic minutes left together. So we're going to do a quick round of answers. Actually, we can get another one over here to throw into the mix if you want to share your question.
So my name's Ben Neymark-Ross. I research and teach nonviolent resistance at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. So thank you for your paid and unpaid work and for taking time away from it to be with us tonight. As I research and watch and engage in activism here in the US, I can't help but think about similar activism outside the US and the wealth of experience in Russia and Hungary and Venezuela and India, the activists who are resisting democratically elected leaders who turn authoritarian or who are elected as authoritarians. And so I'm wondering, you're all busy, many of you probably are not sleeping very much, but to what extent are you learning from or teaching, exchanging ideas and information with activists outside the U.S.?
Awesome. So we've got where and how to run, how to work with those that don't share the same policies or positions, and then how to learn from advocates and activists in other countries, which I'm a huge fan of. But let's go to some responses.
I have a very short answer about reaching over to the other side. Again, I run a 501c3 nonpartisan organization. Only 25% of registered voters are Republicans. And yet they have the White House, the Supreme Court, Congress, 68 out of 99 legislative chambers, 33 out of 50 governorships, and a veto-proof trifecta in 25 states, which means that the current electorate does not match or mirror the population. So I think that it is important, if you do partisan work, which I do not, to not get bogged down in reaching out to a slim majority of people who have come to dominate the country by taking over state ledge and then changing district boundaries so that politicians pick their voters instead of voters picking their politicians. I don't know, I grew up in a working class neighborhood and people aren't like me and they don't agree with me, and sometimes you just have to move on. And it's like I could spend the rest of my life trying to convince someone that people aren't paid protesters, or I could find the people who know that they're not paid protesters and just get them to the polls. And I would say that the math probably suggests that trying to persuade people who are fundamentally opposed to what you're selling is not worth your time.
Interesting. So
someone
you're gonna have some thoughts on this.
Take the rest of that.
Yeah.
I will say that one of the things is that for national elections, when we build coalition of communities of color plus progressive Caucasians, that's a winning. Those are winning numbers that are almost impossible to defeat. So I think that part of the problem is, again, back to this budgetary issue of how are we engaging communities of color, what resourcing are we putting into that election cycles? Are we taking those votes for granted? Are there things that we could be doing to mobilize better, and build those coalitions and make sure that we're really achieving the results that we can. I did want to speak to your point earlier about living in a red state. I'm from Indiana, so I also hail from a red state. But one of the most important things that you could do if you're thinking of running for office, I think it's really important to not fall out of love with the places that we grew up. We can't all just live in these, cities on the East and West Coast. We have to move back home. You're the one who's going to have, the friends and the family and the people you grew up with, and you're going to understand your own community better than anyone. So I think that it's important if you can, and if you can move home and run, then that's one of the better things that you can contribute to helping us all move forward and to making sure that all communities are, that we have progressives in all communities. And then I would say, in the meantime, while you're here, find organizations that you can support. You have a wealth of, bright, engaged people sitting here at Harvard. So if you can support in any way through research and volunteering or anything else that applies to your skill sets, reach out to one of the resistance organizations as you hear of them and offer to lend a hand, whatever you can do remotely.
You should move home. You should run. We'll help you.
We've decided for you. Good luck.
Here's the thing to keep in mind with a lot of these really red states. That's probably places where the Democratic Party hasn't fielded a candidate, which means that Democrats in that area haven't had a reason to show up and vote, because why would I if I'm not going to have someone on the ballot to cast a vote for? It's a self-perpetuating cycle. So you should move home. You should run. You'll probably lose the first time. You might lose again the second time. Keep doing it anyway. Getting people engaged around the issue and forcing someone you're running against to be held accountable is one of the best ways to make them defend their position and engage with progressives in your area, and maybe convince a few Republicans too. I think she's absolutely right. You can't dismiss it. One of the things that we're looking at when we're talking to these young candidates is, yes, run where you live, but run where you understand the problems and where the office you're running for gives you a chance to solve it.
That's good. Any interaction, last question, answer with any other advocates from other countries or other movements or things you found inspiring?
We got a request from a group of activists in Hungary who are resisting the encroaching dictatorship to translate our guide into Hungarian, which was like our first, we had Spanish and then we had Hungarian, and that was like super exciting for me. I think more broadly, the overarching, I actually went to Fletcher and I studied nonviolence when I was there, and so it's sort of an interesting question to get. But for me, I think there's sort of this overarching strategic importance of nonviolence and importance of training and commitment and sort of discipline when you're doing this kind of organizing, and then sort of some of the different facets that movements have found to be useful, like sort of decentralized leaderlessness, generally sort of an emphasis on a commitment to shared principles and shared values rather than necessarily sort of all acting on exactly the same plan that's been laid out in advance. So just a couple of reflections.
I think that interaction between different cultures and different cultures even within the same country is really important. There's a lot we can learn from the farm workers. There's a lot we can learn from the civil rights era. There's a lot we can learn from people in other countries. I'll close with this as we're wrapping up. Like, one of the things that most affected me in my time working with Malala was going to sit with Congressman John Lewis, and it was this beautiful moment where there's this grandfatherly figure from the civil rights movement who's African American sitting with at that time 17-year-old girl from Swat Valley in Pakistan, and he sat her down and he said, "We have so much more in common than you realize." And she kind of looked at him with wide eyes, and he pulled out of his desk this organizing guide that was actually in Hindi from India that had Dr. King on the cover, and he was talking about the sharing of tactics between nonviolence with Gandhi and the civil rights era, and the study and the conversation and the connecting that went back and forth. And it was this really beautiful moment of the cross-generational, cross-cultural connection. So, we're not the first ones to be here. I can say I had so many friends and colleagues who were, concerned after the election, especially from communities of color, and I said to them, and I was sitting talking with Malala, and she said, this is what this looks like. There are moments of disappointment, and that has to be the fuel for the fire to actually get organized. And don't fear a constraint. Constraint forces commitment and creativity, and that's the place, the uncomfortable place, the inconvenient place where real change happens, I believe, and I think all of us would probably agree. So I want to give a round of applause to our awesome panel. So I want to thank everyone for coming. If you're a student, you're the most important folks here. Sorry, everyone who's not a student. But if you actually want to volunteer or want to be an intern or a fellow over the summer, please get in contact with these organizations. I have office hours if you want to come and talk to me about how to get connected. Do you need Do you need help? Do you want people to help? So if you want to help, if you want to sign up, I can help you get to them. And just like if not you, who, right? If not now, when? So please go out, get involved, stay involved. Thank you for coming tonight.